Thank you, Father Kelly. Reverend Fathers, all our honored guests, and my dear brothers. Father Joseph Corolla, I heard a story about him once. Someone was asking him about a model for priests because he works at the Gregorian University in Rome, and so it's his business to train priests. And so the person asked him, what are we aiming for when we're preparing priests? And without missing a beat, Father Corolla said, the cross. That's simply the model of the priesthood. So it's in this context that I want to talk to you about my priest hero, Father Don Lamashevitz. He's my pastor in Grand Rapids, and he's been my pastor at St. Isidore for a long time. St. Isidore is known as one of the Polish mother churches in the city, and he came to the parish in a really rough time. He's been there for a long time, and I think it was the 70s or the 80s. The parish had got a new pastor, and the pastor was making a lot of changes that a lot of people didn't like. And so this is funny now. It wasn't funny then, but it's funny now because it's over, and it's also funny because you could probably see the families at my parish doing something like this again. But what they did to protest some of the changes, they carried a casket through the streets, and they said it was holding the dead body of St. Isidore Parish. So after this, Father Don was placed as the pastor, and he had a lot to do, a big mess on his hands. And I asked him once, like, what was that like coming into the parish? And he said he didn't worry about it too much. He came in. He had only been a priest for, I think it was less than 10 years. Maybe it was around 10. And he came in, and he came into church. He hadn't even walked in the rectory to unpack his bags yet. So he had his suitcase. He walked into church, and he went to the side chapel to Our Blessed Lady. And he said, this is your business, dear mother. Show me what to do, and I will do it. And I was really impressed that he didn't worry at all in that. So that's sort of the context of all this. Father Don himself is sort of an unassuming character. He's a tall, thin Polish priest. He's been a priest for over 50 years. He's got enormous Polish hands, and by most accounts, he's pretty ordinary, actually. There's nothing to impress us about his intellect or his stature. He doesn't receive visions in prayer. He's got the usual fairly messy office of a priest. Sometimes he's very awkward in conversation, and he's no good at improv or like making things run smoothly in liturgy. And often his homilies or the direction he gives you in the confessional is totally obscure and unintelligible. But I still want to talk to you about him because I think it's because of these very things that I just mentioned that he's my priest hero. Last year, Justin Wiltsey, another seminarian from my parish who graduated, he's at Mundelein Seminary right now, compared Father Don to St. John Vianney, which was very ambitious, but I think he did a good job, and I agree with everything he said. This year I want to talk about how Father Don gives us a great example of the essential virtues of the priesthood. As I said, Father Corolla said the goal of the priesthood is the cross. And I think Father Don is, first of all, a good priest because he understands that very deeply and very profoundly. He understands the truth of the cross, the truth that life comes through giving our own lives and through self-donation. He is always, always a servant priest. He has no personal agenda at all. In every moment, he is simply seeking to serve someone else and to do whatever God wills. He simply says yes to everything God asks, all the way, with no conditions, simply a willing and free yes. And there are many examples of this, but I think my favorite one is in the liturgy. During Mass or at adoration or something, it can never be said of Father Don that he stands in the way of Jesus, that he gets in front of Jesus at all. When he's celebrating Mass, it's always solely about Jesus, and you can forget that Father Don's there, and that's a very, very beautiful gift. One priest I greatly look up to, Father John Hardin, he was a Jesuit. He said, not only do we have to love the cross, sorry, I just gave away my point. Not only do we have to live the cross, but we have to love living the cross. And that means not only loving the resurrection on the other side, but loving the cross as the cross. And that takes a lot of trust in the will of the Father. But for Father Don, I think he does this well. His attention is always focused on whatever God in his providence has put in front of him, whatever he's been giving to do in this very moment, or whoever is in front of him. He's continually entrusting every word or action to the Lord. He's always listening to whatever God has for him, and he's always recollected to the now, to what God has placed in front of him right now. And like I said, that takes a lot of trust in the Father's will and a lot of love for the cross, for the pouring of himself out right now. He lives this at all times. And like I said, I've had spiritual direction with him numerous times, and most often I'll say something, I think he understands, and then I find out he really didn't have a clue what I was saying. And he'll give me some response, and I really don't understand, and I walk out of there quite confused. And this is a pretty common occurrence for me and for lots of others. But people come back to him, like I come back to him, because I'm not there for Father Don. I'm there for Jesus working through him. And because Father Don is always surrendering and entrusting every act, every word to Christ to work through him, because he has no personal agenda of his own, because he's so willing to let Jesus work through him, that the fruits of these even confusing spiritual direction meetings are always peace and joy and growth. Even if, sometimes I think there are some things he said to me that I will simply never understand or never make sense of, and that's okay. But there are many times when 2-3 weeks later, something happens where all of a sudden I understand what he was saying a long time ago. All of a sudden it makes sense. All of a sudden the advice he gave me is applicable. And so because of that surrender he has, because of that desire he has to do whatever the Father has for him, and because of the trust he has in God to work through him, there's lots of fruit that comes out of his ministry. Like I said, he lives this faith. He lives this dying to self and trust in the Father that we see in the cross all the time. He's always a priest. He's always Christ's presence among his people. He draws his life only from uniting himself with Christ in prayer and in pouring himself out. So I've learned that it isn't a superior intellect or an extraordinary spiritual life or perfect organization or people skills. Father Don shows that all of those things are not essential to the priesthood. What a priest must be is convinced of the truth of the cross. And I especially like this crucifix we have in our chapel because you can see the life of Jesus pouring out of his wounds. He doesn't just have nails there. He's got blood pouring out. And I can see that in my own pastor, Father Don. Like I said, a priest must be convinced of the absolute truth of the cross that God gives us. He must always simply, freely, and willingly say yes when the Father asks. Christ crucified must absorb all his attention. He must trust the Father completely, so to surrender his will to the Father in heaven. These are the things that are essential to the priesthood, and these are the things that are so quietly exemplified by my pastor, Father Don. Praise be Jesus Christ. Amen.